Paul, when we think about something like neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to grow and expand depending on how much we use it, if we regularly use this self-soothing mechanism, will that actually start changing the structure of our brain?
Well, it's a very good question, this. I mean, there are studies being done in America looking at the effects of certain types of meditation, practicing, focusing on compassion for yourself and for others. So you spend 20, 40 minutes a day practicing, meditating. And this is showing that there are changes in the brain when you practice. Now, we know actually that all kinds of practice changes the brain. So if you take up playing the violin, and the areas of the brain which control fine muscle movement in your hands, they would change. So it is a question of facilitating change by practice.
So the more we practice, the better at it we'll get.
The more you practice, the better at it you will get. And the key thing always is noticing, pay attention, noticing that you're drifting off into the angry, frustrated, critical self. It's not your fault. It's not to blame you for that. It's not to be angry about being angry. It's just to take a breath and just think, now, how actually would I like to cope with this as me at my best, me at my most compassionate?
From what you're saying is there's so many things that are actually out of our control in life in terms of what's actually happening. But this is something that we can actually have more control over.
Very much so. And in compassion-focused therapy, which is the therapy that we practice, this idea about the things you are in control of and not in control of is very important. For example, we point out that humans are part of the flow of life. We have evolved from other primates. We didn't arrive on the planet de novo, anew. And that means that your brain has all kinds of systems in it which go back many millions of years. But then you've got this other brain, which we call a new brain, which allows you to think and ruminate and plan and anticipate. And it's fantastic in some ways, but it also gives you problems. So, for example, you won't find zebras staying up at night worrying about where the lions are going to be in the morning and are their children going to have enough to eat, because they don't have the capacity for that type of thinking. But humans do. And so, in fact, the way in which we think about things, our futures, ourselves, the way in which we think about ourselves in relationship to others, we just talked about that. All of this thinking that goes on in our new brains can stimulate old brain emotions such as anxiety, anger, and so forth. So animals, for example, can be vengeful, but humans can build weapons of mass destruction, as we see going on, sadly, in different parts of the world. And we can be quite a vicious species because we can use our anger and our vengeance systems in very new ways. But the same applies for the more pro-social or the kinder parts of the self. We can use those in new ways as well. We can plan, we can think, we can make decisions about, actually, perhaps this is a part of the self I wanted to develop. Rather than developing my angry self or my vengeful self, I'm going to actually try and develop my compassionate self, because this is what will help me get through. This is what will help me develop relationships. This is what will help me reach my long-term goals.
When we reach a problem in our lives, and often we feel very alone, what would be the compassionate way of actually sort of try to communicate to people that they're not alone?
The key thing here is there's aloneness on different levels. Firstly, there's the aloneness that there's something wrong about you in particular. People who get depressed often feel alone because they feel it's them in particular. So it's important to recognize that many of the feelings that people have when they're depressed are shared by many, many millions. Sadly, depression is a brain state that we can go into because of the way our brains are made. And 1 in 4 of us, 1 in 5 of us are going to have a depression at some point in our lives. So the first point of loneliness is what we call common humanity, to recognize that we share difficult experiences with many, many other people. It's part of being a human being. All of us are born, we grow, and then we decay and die. So life is suffering, as the Buddhists say. This is part of what we are. Life is difficult. We suffer. We have anxiety. We have rages. We have depressions. Okay, this is not the person's fault. It's the way we are. The second element of breaking through loneliness is to try to identify with those other people who might have support groups, for example, depression support groups, anxious support groups, to be with people who have gone through the same sorts of experiences that you have or you are. Okay, so that can be an extremely helpful thing to do, to realize there are other people out there. It's not just you, and just as it wasn't their fault, it's not your fault. Okay, and then the third thing to break through with loneliness is obviously to talk to people who might not have gone through those experiences, but who want to help you. Your friends, your relations. Maybe give them a chance to help you. Now, sometimes, of course, when people, talk about their problems and reach out to others, those around them are not always as friendly as they would like to be. So it doesn't always work. And then the fourth level really is seeking perhaps professional help. If you're feeling very lonely and very down, then maybe go and see your GP. But so there are different levels at which we can combat loneliness. The idea that this is not you, this is part of the human condition. We're a member of the human species. The chances are thousands upon thousands of people have felt like you at some point in their lives, at some point in history. Reaching out to others, trying finding others who might have had the same sort of experiences, be it a trauma or whatever. Talking to people close to you, trying to help them understand how you're feeling if you're withdrawing and so forth. Because we're not mind readers, we need people to explain what they're feeling. And then also, if you're really struggling, to go and receive professional help. And if you're just lonely in general, then try and find a task or a hobby that you can go and join others, painting or walking or photography or whatever. Find some connection to people through a task, through an interest. That's often quite useful first step.
So, Paul, what would you say to somebody who was saying, isn't self-criticism just papering over the cracks?
It's a great question, because it's one of the biggest misunderstandings that we come across. Okay, if we start off with the idea of compassion as a simple definition, say from the Dalai Lama, this would be sensitivity to the suffering of yourself and others with a commitment to do something about it. So just pay attention, be aware, don't try and run away or drink or whatever it is, and then try and do something about it. So that's the first point, that actually it's about engaging with your cracks, not papering them over. Okay, so the second point is that compassion requires a lot of courage, actually. I suppose in the West, the story of compassionate courage is that of Christ. I'm not particularly religious myself, but that is a phenomenal story of compassionate courage. Also, if you have somebody who's, say, agoraphobic, who's frightened of going out, the compassionate thing to do is to not sit in front of the television eating chocolates, because that's easy. It takes away your anxiety. You don't feel anxious while you're watching telly eating chocolates. The compassionate thing to do is to overcome your difficulties by gradually going out. Compassion is what gives you the courage to start to engage with going out, like opening the front door, walking as far up down the road as you can. So what compassion does is it gives you support, it gives you encouragement. It's a kind voice in your head, but it's not one that allows you to slip back into doing things that are not helpful to you, because that's increasing your suffering. Sitting on the couch eating chocolates and just watching TV because you're too frightened to go out is just restricting your life. So compassion is about the way in which we engage with the things that are difficult for us, but we learn to do it kindly rather than a bullying way. And we learn to treat ourselves with respect and encouragement when it gets tough. That's compassion. I think we all recognize that we work best when we have certain challenges, of course, but also when we feel cared about and supported. You see, one of the interesting things, just to kind of put this in, is that when we first started to work with patients, we did a lot of what we call cognitive therapy, where you look at people's thoughts and then you help them think of alternatives. Now, it's a great therapy, and it's had some remarkable successes, but we found that some of our patients were very good at coming up with alternative thoughts. For example, I feel like I'm a failure. It might be a negative thought, and then they say, yes, but I achieved this and I've done that, and so really the evidence is I'm not such a failure. And they'd say, well, I understand the logic, but I don't feel any different. Okay? So how do you feel different? When you look at it, when you look at things from a particular kind of point of view, what is it that allows you to feel different given the way in which you think? So that was interesting. That was the first question. And the next question was, I asked patients, well, how do you hear these alternatives in your voice? Do you hear them as a kind, encouraging voice? Look, I know you're feeling like failure because you're depressed and life's been very hard, but actually, look at this, just remember these things. And they'd say, oh, no, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. No, it's kind of pull yourself together. Look at the evidence, for goodness sake. And so actually the emotional tone of these efforts to be looking at the evidence and so forth was terrible, actually. And so the first things, and this is going back 20 years ago, this is going back to the question you asked earlier. So the first thing we try to do is to help people generate alternative thoughts, but then create a warm voice, okay? So we'd write down some alternative thoughts to the idea I'm a failure, but look, I've done this and this and so on. And now hear that in your head in a warm voice. And that proved to be much more difficult than we had anticipated, and people would start to cry. I've never done that. I never felt I was worth caring about, and so on and so on. So that's what alerted us to the fact that this emotional quality of how you relate to yourself is very important. Not just what you say to yourself, but how you say it is key to opening up these different systems in the brain.